Welcome to yet another episode of The Big Picture. So the last week episode, we kind of finished with a comment on the US NRI investors specifically, but it was not really intended at the US investors alone, NRIs alone. So see, what is happening in India is today there is lot more awareness on global investing, that most investors actually have a much more rounded global portfolio, not just focused on India, but a portfolio which has stocks outside India too. But unfortunately, when we look at that portfolio or when we discuss with investors, we notice that that portfolio is predominantly dominated by stocks in the US, and more so they are technology stocks. So while we kind of said that an US NRI investor would do well to diversify his portfolio away from US, even an Indian investor would do well to diversify his global exposure from just one asset class, which is US technology, to much more diversified portfolio in terms of countries, currencies, and industries. Right. So that was the perspective of that episode. I kind of missed communicating that. We received a lot of feedback and comments on to explain our logic, explain our hypothesis as to why one should look at a more global portfolio. So it stems from two different factors which are not really what I would call as correlated or not really connected to each other. One factor is essentially de-dollarization. So what is de-dollarization? De-dollarization is essentially most countries who are trading partners moving away from dollar as the base currency to a different currency. It could be anything. It could be one of their own currencies, or it could be a completely neutral currency, or it could be a basket of currencies, or it could be a currency which is benchmarked to kind of backed by hard assets like gold or anything else. That's one part of de-dollarization. The second factor of de-dollarization is essentially, if you look at most countries hold their reserves in gold, foreign reserves in gold, foreign reserves in other currencies, right? So what we anticipate there is, when you talk about de-dollarization, what we anticipate is some of these reserves, foreign reserves, let's say example RBI holding US dollar reserve, could shift to other currencies. So what happens in this situation is the value of dollar as a store of wealth erodes. Now in such a situation, the cost of everything that is marked in dollars goes up, which is essentially because dollar going down means everything going up, and in that context, you don't want to own too much of dollar assets, dollar companies which have dollar earnings, because those earnings are going to drop, right? So that's one part, the de-dollarization, which has been in play for the last few years. The second part is something more technology driven, which is if you go back in the history of technology development over the last 40-50 years, we have had five significant pivots. The first one is IBM launching its personal computer. The second one is Intel developing the x86 processor. The third one is the US Telecom Act. The fourth one is your ARM processor, or the ARM processor, which is powering all your mobile phones and everything else. And the fifth one is your AI. Now, if you look at these identified tech pivots, the first one, the third one, which is your business machine, IBM, the third one, which is your internet, the Telecom Act in the US, and the fifth one, which is AI, they are largely business to business pivots. Whereas the second one, which is x86 processor of Intel, and the ARM processors, are basically a consumer pivot. Now, when we look at these pivots, the returns to this theme is much higher and much longer. The time this theme works versus the returns you make, it is much longer and much higher when it is a consumer pivot. So the returns to investing in the pivot of when Intel introduced its x86, or when ARM processors were introduced, was much better. A B2B pivot, on the contrary, where B2B pivot is much shorter in duration of the cycle, as well as lower in terms of returns. Now, why is that? So typically companies like to optimize, right? So now that is where DeepSeek fits in. So DeepSeek has demonstrated a certain way of engineering these AI models, or rather engineering the AI, what I would call as the hardware, and the model in itself, which kind of reduces the dependency on the specific high-end AI process, and they claim that they can do it using a regular processors. Now this is a big pivot, because this is going to trigger a wave of innovations. Now these innovations is going to reduce the returns to the current theme, and this typically happens in a B2B pivot, right? So putting these two factors together, we would like to do is reduce the exposure to dollar exposure and introduce exposure to other currencies, other countries, and other industries. Okay, so coming back to this week, has been an interesting week in terms of we have seen multiple companies report results, from multiple sectors, banking, IT services, and everything else. And one of the common things that we noticed is, particularly with respect to the IT services, is that there are a lot of questions being raised on the business model. See, the sector has done very well over the last 30 years, created huge amount of employment, created multimillionaires who have been shareholders in their respective companies, whereas now questions are being raised on whether this model will survive the next few years, or whether jobs will be lost in this. Now, while we don't have an answer, from a personal finance perspective, the way we look at this is, are you ready financially if there is a job loss? So in addition to all this that we have been talking, the last 2 weeks, most Indian companies across sectors have reported results, and we find a lot of interesting takeaways from those results. The key one being the commentary on the business of IT services, offshoring, or rather outsourcing as a business model and things like that, right? Now, while the industry has done very well over 30 years, has created a lot of wealth for itself and the ecosystem, the employees, and everybody else. Now there are questions being raised, and we really do not have answers. But what I would do if I'm employed in that industry is, I would just look at whether I am financially independent if something happens to my job, or I am temporarily not temporarily unemployed. So do I have ability to live my life without depending on my salary for the rest of the life? That is financial independence. B, do I have enough resources to tide over this, what I would call as the emergency savings or contingency reserves, to support myself till I find my next gig, right? So while see, we keep talking a lot about reskilling, upskilling, and all that. See, but we also need to appreciate and understand the fact that our cognitive skills diminish with time, with age. To kind of say that what I learned when I was 20, I cannot really claim that I have the same efficiency in understanding and learning something when I'm 45 or 50. So that's something that one has to consider. So, and ideally, if you are in an industry which can undergo change, pretty much everything in services can undergo a change. Say today I run my company, and 3, 5, 10 years down the line, I do not know if these services will be required. So everybody who is part of services industry should really look at how far or how close they are to financial independence, and this should be something that you should plan much earlier when you start investing, and how you plan your personal finances, your own expenses, your own investments, and everything else. Thank you. We'll meet you again next week with another episode of The Big Picture.